Georgia beating Tennessee 31-17, keeping their season alive. Let's go over the highest grade players, starting off with the victorious Georgia Bulldogs. Oscar Delp came back with a vengeance this past week. 87 grades. Been kind of a quiet year for him, but he was outstanding yesterday against Tennessee. Kristen Miller, the D tackle, 79.5. Linebacker Jalen Walker, one of the top 15 prospects for Trevor Sikkema on that big board, 76.7. Michael Williams, another first-round prospect for Trevor Sikkema, 76.7 as well. Daniel Harris, the cornerback, 76.3. And how about Carson Beck, bouncing back in a big way with an 85.9 grade. We'll talk about him in just a second. Let's go over to Tennessee, though, with their highest grade players. Starting off with another tight end for them as well, Miles Kitselman at 76.6, James Pierce Jr. 75.2, Dylan Sampson a 70, Will Brooks 68.7, Christian Carls 66.9, and Nico Iamaleava with a 56.9 grade. So Dalton, in this game that really kept Georgia's season alive, what was that that told the story?
I'm actually going to go with the Tennessee side here, and I think this game is very representative of what their offense has been all year. It's a grind. When it's going well, they're running the ball, and Nico is making enough throws to win the ball game. And when it's not going well, there's been times this year where they've gone long stretches of games where it's completely shut down. That's what happened in the second half of this game. They didn't score. Minus .155 EPA per play in the second half, just 4.2 yards per play. And something we're not used to, and we've seen it all year out of a Josh Heupel-led offense, is only one explosive play the entire second half of this game, and it was very early in the third quarter. Georgia's extremely good at preventing explosive plays down the field. Even in their loss to Ole Miss, they prevented deep shots down the field, and Ole Miss manufactured their way to enough points to win the game. Tennessee, they've done that against some other teams, but it's very hard with this offense, and there's just not a ton of diversity to it, right? They want to run the ball, they want to throw screens, and they want to throw go balls, and it's that last part when they can't make any explosive plays, and Nico's just not accurate enough downfield yet in spots like this. This has been happening to this Tennessee offense. The other thing that worried me in this game was, you mentioned Michael Williams and those guys up front, those grades. Tennessee's offensive line.
Yeah.
They've really been working through it this year, right? And Dylan Sampson's run through a lot of contact and a lot of tackles, but in this game, 48.4 overall grade for their offensive line, their lowest of the season, and they've had a lot of low numbers this season. So I believe I saw there's only 2 games all year where they graded over a 60 up front. It's an offensive line that has struggled despite a lot of the talent around it, and Tennessee's offense in this game, it's what would worry me most. I think there's still a chance here that Tennessee could miss the playoff. I think their whole season comes down to their matchup with Vanderbilt the last week of the year. So if they don't find more points than this, and I understand before this game they had held every opponent under 20 points, but eventually you have to score, right? Because a team like Georgia's going to realize what type of game they're in, and they just got to keep getting first downs and keep grinding and keep making stops, right? Tennessee's offense is very inconsistent, and you saw it in this game. This game was tied at 17 at halftime, and then they just couldn't get anything going in the second half, and Georgia just kept making stops and kept grinding away at it.
So you go from one quarterback in inconsistent offense that did not perform well, Nico Iamaleava. Well, I'm going with the quarterback that did perform well, even though he's been inconsistent all year, in Carson Beck. 83.8 passing grade is my stat for Carson Beck in this game. Dalton, he's only had 2 other games with an 80-plus passing grade, even a 70-plus passing grade at all this year. It was against Auburn and Mississippi State. And I love Zach Tantillo staying with me right now, but let's face it, those are 2 of the lesser teams in the SEC this year. Tennessee has one of the best defenses in college football, and yet Carson Beck still performed really well against them. He had 3 big-time throws, 1 turnover-worthy play, 24 for 39 for 328 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. 0 interceptions. That's huge for Carson Beck when, again, the last time he threw 0 picks was against Auburn in Week 6, right? So it's been a long time since Carson Beck has been unblemished in terms of throwing interceptions. Also, how about he ran for 29 yards and a touchdown as well? He was doing really well getting outside the pocket. We never really see Carson Beck do that much. Only 5 negatively graded plays all game for Carson Beck against Tennessee. Like I said, he had a sub-60 passing grade in 3 straight games. Just a big-time bounce-back game against an elite defense with your back against the wall, your season is on the line, and your most important player in Carson Beck just really performed like the guy we thought he was going into the year. He looked like last year's version, honestly. He was poised. He was deadly accurate. Really good decision-making as well. It was really good to see Carson Beck, a guy that so many people kind of wrote off, honestly. And even though we were saying, hey, he's not a first-round pick anymore. Now, I still don't think he's a first-round pick now. But this is the kind of performance that's like, okay, that's why we thought he was the elite quarterback in college football going into the year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And he was really the biggest reason that we both had picked him to get at least to the national title game. And you mentioned it. This is the Beck we expected to see. I thought, and I know he had even better numbers against Auburn, against Mississippi State. I thought this was by far his best game of the year.
Yeah.
I mean, considering, you mentioned it, the circumstances, the team he's going against, deadly accurate down the field in this game, which we hadn't seen a whole lot. It took off and ran, like you mentioned, under pressure, and he had made a lot of poor decisions under pressure this year as well. So I think, and this is a really good defensive front Georgia was going against. But no, I think this version of Beck could take them on a deep playoff run, but they need it week in and week out.
That I'm watching right now. The touchdown throw to Delp,
the first one
on the post,
yeah,
disgusting, dude. Like that kind of just timing and accuracy on that, like that is Carson Beck. That is exactly who we thought he was going into the year, at least. And I remember that play. Like, oh, okay, we got Carson Beck.
And confidence. I think over the last few games, you could see his confidence was shaken. It just, when you see him throwing balls, leaning away from defenders and just putting balls into traffic that we never saw him put into traffic last year. And I understand. Again, we've talked about without Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey, it hasn't been as easy for him this year by any means. But you saw him last night throwing with confidence, throwing with conviction, and that's something we hadn't seen the last few weeks.
That was an anticipation throw too.
Yeah.
And sometimes when your confidence is not there as a quarterback, you need to see guys open. He didn't see him open. Delp was not open at that point, and he still threw it in the perfect place where he knew Delp would be. So outstanding performance by Carson Beck. But Dalton, for you, outside of that, what was the most impressive part of the Georgia victory?
Well, you mentioned one of the guys, and there's really three of them that are involved here with Oscar Delp, Ben Urosic, and Lawson Lucky. They combined for 9 catches, 127 yards, and the 2 Oscar Delp touchdowns. And I think it is no accident at all that Georgia finally got these tight ends involved. We thought there was a chance it could be the best tight end room in the country, right, going into it. And they set season highs in all of those stats this year. It's just not – it's what they need to get to, because they're not a loaded wide receiving core, right? They need to use multiple tight end sets. They need to get these guys out in the slot and working from different spots. And this is really, to me, this is the first time – this was the biggest game, especially I think of his career, of Oscar Delp, because he can be a weapon. He's not Brock Bowers, but we thought coming into this year he'd be a legitimate weapon for them like he was in this game. Now they finally got into this. I think you're going to see more of these multiple tight end sets going forward, and this is where Georgia has to lean, because throwing out on the perimeter has not worked much for them this year.
And just really against really good safeties at Tennessee as well.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of like the Moneyball quote where it's like, you're trying to replace Giambi. Like, you're trying to replace Brock Bowers, the greatest tight end of all time. You don't got to do it. You got to rebuild them in the aggregate. And that's what they got. They got the aggregate. They got a few tight ends now that can make up for the production of Brock Bowers.
9 for 127 and 2 touchdowns.
That's Brock Bowers.
Probably a line that Brock Bowers would put up, and he did, right?
Yeah.
But if you get it out of all of them and having it from multiple different spots, and these are all guys that can line up anywhere on the field. They're not just inline guys, right? You could have one in line and one in the slot, or one out wide, or however you want to do it. But I don't think it's any coincidence that this offense worked its best when they finally got all 3 of these tight ends involved.
Yeah, so they can't replace Brock Bowers, but they can rebuild them in the aggregate, basically, is what Georgia did yesterday against Tennessee. I want to talk about the interior offensive line, Dawn, which I think is the best interior offensive line that we have in college football, because the tackles for Georgia, and this is still an issue, that they did not perform well against Tennessee. And obviously, Tennessee's got outstanding. James Pierce Jr. is going to be a first-round pick, probably. Joshua Joseph's a really good player as well on the edge. But Georgia's interior has been outstanding this year, and really why the O-line as a whole has been outstanding this year. Jared Wilson, the center, and then 2 guards, Tate Ratledge and Dylan Fairchild, only allowed 1 pressure combined on 123 combined pass blocking snaps, 41 snaps each for each of them. Only one other time was any one of those 3 players beaten on a rep either. Remember, I've talked about how there's some times where Beck gives rid of the football very quickly. So even though the defender beat the guy, he doesn't get a pressure because he got rid of the football quickly. We only lost 1 other time. So really only 2 losses all night against Tennessee. And that's important to note, because Omar Norman Lott, the D tackle, if you look at PFF's big board right now, he's a top 25 prospect. So you're going up against a potential first-round pick at defensive tackle in Omar Norman Lott, and he can do anything against its interior offensive line. Because right now, Norman Lott leads the nation in pressure rate and pass rush win rate for FBS D tackles. They got to figure it out at offensive tackle, and that's a storyline we'll keep an eye on for the rest of the season. But with this interior, with Tate Ratledge now healthy, this is the best interior offensive line, I think, bar none in college football.
No, absolutely. And interior protection is so big when you're talking about a true pocket quarterback like Carson Beck and him needing to be protected. We've talked about the difference between his clean numbers and his pressured numbers. And it's a huge factor. It's the reason they still stand a huge chance is because Carson Beck, when he's clean, is still really good, and that interior protection is going to protect him more often than not. You mentioned it. Obviously, some struggles at tackle. It's been a little inconsistent, but as long as those three guys on the inside are there, they're going to stand a chance.
And how about, like, Jared Wilson, dude? We haven't talked about him a lot this year, but, like, Cedric Van Pran's a very hard guy to replace, and Jared Wilson has been one of the best centers in college football this year immediately. Like, so shout out him as well, because we knew Ratledge and Fairchild that they were two of the best guards in the country, but center was a question mark. Jared Wilson has answered all those questions this year. He's been one of the best centers in America. So Georgia keeping their season alive, and now all they got to do is beat UMass and beat Georgia Tech. And obviously the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets, nothing to look over, and maybe not the UMass Minutemen either, but Georgia starting to look very, for a team that we thought was on life support for the college football playoff, they're looking very strong for the college football playoff now, beating Tennessee. Hey, thanks for watching another episode of the PFF College Football Show. Please make sure you guys subscribe to the channel.
Also, subscribe to PFF Plus at subscribe.pff.com for all of the same data and grades that we use in our show, plus fantasy tools, betting tools, and our mock draft simulator.